We want to welcome everybody to this week's Leader to Leader with MASSP. Welcome back from the holiday break. My name is Colin, Ripmaster, the Associate Executive Director at MASSP. With us today is Bob Kefgen and Wendy Zdeb, our Executive Director. If you would, please do take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat function and let us know who's with us today as we kick off this round of learning specific to the Return to School Roadmap and what we should be thinking about, doing now, and planning for as we go to the future. Please note that this webinar is being recorded. We will have this brief introduction. Bob will provide a recap of the Michigan Safe Start Review. I'll share some of the resources with that. Wendy's going to provide us an overview of the Preparedness plan, and we'll share with you a template that we've created as well as one from Ken ISD as an example before moving into thinking forward and what you should be doing now and links to resources that we've accumulated or curated for your use. Please note that this is being recorded and that it will be posted for public viewing. So please do be mindful of that and know that everything that we're sharing with you today is based on the knowledge we have and our understandings through the EO and legal counsel through July 16th, which is today, of 2020. These are for you to think about in collaboration with district leaders, your teachers, and student leaders in the Board of Education as you plan your piece. Remember, this is guidance, and if you have questions or need legal clarification, you should seek that from your local legal counsel. With that, please do know we will be using the Q&A function of this webinar to pose questions and provide you the opportunity to upvote questions you think are most important. We also have 3 or 4 polls embedded into this presentation where we'll be soliciting your feedback. For adding ideas or comments, please use the chat function. And know that at the end of this webinar, we will have a recording as well as a printout of the slide deck and additional resources that will be emailed to everyone who is part of this webinar today. So thank you for giving up time to be with us. With that, we want to get your thinking. What is your district's current status for creating the preparedness plan? Some of you may not have started awaiting sample plans to build from. Some of you are in the process of exploring options but not drafting yet. Others have started drafting plans with your team but needing to complete those plans or are awaiting board approval. And some of you actually have already taken your plans for board approval. So at this time, Ryan, our in-house technology expert aficionado, is going to push out a poll to you, and we encourage you to pick one of those 4 options or 5 options to let us know where you are in the planning process.
Waiting on about 15 more people or so to vote. About 10 more seconds.
So it looks like there's a few of us who are not started yet, a larger proportion that are still exploring options, likely why part of you are here, 1 in 3. And then we have about half of us drafting plans and a couple who are pretty close to being done. Thanks for sharing that with us. That's very helpful as we continue to go forward. For those who have already started drafting plans, completed plans, or are looking for some faces, as you go through this webinar, we suggest that you think about how does what we share align with your plan, where are gaps, and where might be some conflicts that need to be revisited. For those who haven't started their planning or in the process of exploring, hopefully this will provide you some framework and resources that you can use to build out your plan. With that, I want to turn it over to Bob Kefgen, who's going to review with us the Michigan Safe Start Plan and roadmap to reopening.
Thank you, Colin. So as folks on this call will remember, we've seen this graphic from the My Safe Start Plan. If you've been on any of our previous Leader to Leaders, we've used this a few times now. It's just important to remember that we're talking about a 6-phase plan that was designed, and what we're working from here was a plan that was designed for reopening the economy. So when it came time to look at reopening schools, we had to go beyond this. The other thing to keep in mind is that this 6-phase plan that we keep referring back to was written at the beginning or near the beginning of all of this. And that as we've moved forward, the framing is being updated. The framing is being refined and additional guidance is becoming available. And that's what we saw come out before the 4th of July holiday in the form of the My Safe Schools roadmap that the governor put out and the accompanying executive order. One thing I do want to clarify is which phase things are in, because that matters for your planning. And we had a lot of questions when this first rolled out about, well, I'm looking at the risk phases on the state's COVID website, and I'm looking at the MERC regions, the Economic Recovery Council regions, and I'm seeing different things. Who is in what phase? So to be very clear right now, regions 6 and 8, those are the blue regions on the right map, or in other words, the Upper Peninsula and the Traverse City region, which runs through a good chunk of northern Michigan. Those 2 regions are in phase 5. That is, they are more reopened than the rest of the state. The whole rest of the state, everybody else, is in phase 4. So even though we've seen a spike of cases in the Lansing area and things things aren't looking as good in some areas, and we might see up and down movement in our case numbers, the rest of the state is still in phase 4. And we will not see that change unless you see a further executive order. So just know that if there is a change in phases, it will come in the form of an additional executive order. In other words, it'll be big news and not something you can miss. But the state's current phase and the phase that matters for your reopening plan for the fall is something that's, they're different things. So just be clear on that. So as you're planning for the fall and you're looking at the My Safe Schools roadmap, remember that what you're talking about is not just writing one plan. What you're really writing are 3 plans. You're writing a plan for what you're going to do if the state is in phases 1 through 3. Because in phases 1 through 3, we're talking about fully remote instruction, no in-person instruction in phases 1 through 3. In phase 4, we're talking about in-person instruction with strict safety protocols. And in phase 5, those safety protocols become more flexible. But every district in the state has to have a plan for all 3 eventualities, because as we're moving through the school year and we're seeing things shift and we're seeing changes in numbers, we may see a change in phases. In other words, your school has to be ready to move forward or backward, depending on what phase we're in and what the current case numbers are for coronavirus.
So given what you've heard in the news, what you've been reading in the media, given what you know about your local community and politics, which phase do you anticipate will be returning to school in August or September? This is our next poll for you.
Waiting on about 10 more folks to vote. About 10 more seconds.
So about a third of us believe we might be taking a step back given the current dynamics and behaviors within our communities. And a little over half of us, 2/3 of us, are looking at where we are right now. And about 10% of us are hopeful that we're actually going to shift into phase 5, or maybe you're in a phase 5 zone right now and believe that's where you'll stay. So with that, thank you for participating in that poll and helping us know. So Bob referenced the Safe School Reopening, or Roadmap to Reopening the Schools. And the roadmap broke down the return to school into 4 categories: safety protocols that schools need to follow, mental and social emotional well-being protocols, instruction, and operations. Within each of those 4 categories, there are 3 levels of considerations that must be considered. The required considerations are things that you must do. There are no exceptions. As we talk about in statute, those are the shall do. You must do. So as a district, you have to figure out how you're going to implement those required factors or those required considerations within your district. The strongly recommended considerations are things that you should do, and the exception from doing those is if they're not feasible. If they're not feasible and you choose or elect not to do them, you must account for them and justify why you're not doing them within your preparedness plan. And Wendy will show you where that is when we go over that plan. The recommended are things you should do unless they're infeasible, but you do not need to denote in your publicly released or posted preparedness plan why you elected not to do those. So I think something that's been a misconception out there is thinking beyond just the required. So if it's required, yes, you must do it, and it has to be accounted for in your preparedness plan. If it's strongly recommended, you should do it, and the only out is if you can't do it. And when you say you can't do it, you have to justify that and post that in your publicly released assurances that you do. Within then each of those safety protocols, there are subcategories with specific considerations from personal protective equipment and hygiene, spacing and movement, and so on. And for each of those within the preparedness plan, they ask you to tell how you're going to address each of those considerations, as well as denote which ones you are going to do and which ones you can't do and why. MASSP, in a support of that, created an at-a-glance document. And this at-a-glance document is available now on our webpage, and we will send you the link to it. But in there, we've reorganized the roadmap into categories so that districts are able to see the roadmap and the considerations at a glance. So you can see what's required, for example, here in spacing, movement, and access in phases 1 through 3 that aren't required during phases 4 and 5. But then what's strongly recommended within each of those. The benefit of this tool, which is available as both a fillable PDF, so you can click in those check boxes and indicate which ones you're doing, as well as a Google Doc that we've created that you can make a copy of and include in your own, is that in the area that says whether or not or which of these you're going to do, you can click on these and attach this with your plan so you have a record for your district of what you're doing, and then you can note what, for the ones you didn't check, why you chose not to do it. So for each of the areas, we've reorganized this and provided it to you as a member service so that you can see across. So for example, in the screening student, staff, and guests, you can see that under strongly recommended, what are the considerations that are the same. Every school should identify and designate a quarantine area and staff person to care for it, example, is the same in both phases 4 and 5. If you scroll down then to recommended, you'll see that there needs to be monitoring, but how it shifts to be in phase 5. So the document's a resource for you. So as you go through your preparedness plan, you can look at each phase and be able to track which ones you're doing for each without having to flip through an entire document. And then this is able to be posted to your website along with your plan. So this is a resource we provide for you. To share with you more about the preparedness plan is Wendy Zdeb, our Executive Director.
Hi, everyone. I know that when I've been at various workshops and things, I always hate it when people read things to me, but I'm not going to bore you with that. But what I did just do in the preparedness plan, I think some people were a little disappointed when it was released. I think some people thought that there would be like examples and things already like filled for you that you could kind of select from. But really what this preparedness plan does is it is a template. It's just making sure that everything that is required in the executive orders is included in your plan. So one of the questions that I've received since this document was released is, do we absolutely have to use that preparedness plan document? No, you don't. There's no requirement to use this. You could have your own preparedness plan that you've done on a Word document or something like that, and it's posted on your website. But the concern about that would be, did you dot every I and cross every T? So the preparedness plan document and this template just really make sure that you've gone through every single required piece and that you've addressed it appropriately. So that's the benefit of using this actual document. So when we're looking at the slide that's pulled up, it also does specify when it has to be completed. And it also shares, and I have that highlighted in blue, and it also really emphasizes the fact that this has to be board approved. Some people were like, well, why would the board have to approve it? Obviously, the concept is that these some of these plans that you're going to be enacting are going to be challenging. And there's no doubt, whether it's you're requiring masks and people don't want to wear them, they could come to the school board and raise a ruckus about that. So if the board has already approved the plan, then we know that we're all on the same page and that this is what we're doing and nobody's surprised by it. So it's really an idea that you're building kind of consensus by going through and doing it in that way. Colin or Bob, anything you'd add to that first page? Okay, we'll jump on to the next one. So when you start going through these plans and assurances, so you see right at the top, the district agrees to meet all of the following requirements, and it lists the executive order that you have to comply with when you're opening. So the checks are automatically there because the implication is you know that you have to do these things. There's no wiggle room. These things must be done. And those first 4 check boxes are all special education student related. And basically, you are just ensuring that whatever you're going to offer to your general education kids, you're also going to give that same opportunity to your special education kids. That you're going to be compliant with their IDPs and things of that nature. So that's what those first 4 check boxes are for. Then we get down to the 5th one where it starts talking about phase 1, 2, or 3. And if we are in phase 1, 2, or 3, it will close the buildings. There's no wiggle room about that either. Can jump to the next slide. More information about what has to happen during phases 1, 2, and 3. We'll suspend athletics. We're going to continue to pay employees. So this is something that's been a little bit of a difficulty in terms of school districts, because as we've had people being laid off and things of that nature, if we want to continue to get our state aid, then we have to ensure that employees are continuing to be paid. And then we get into food distribution. Also, there were concerns in some school districts where they have a really small food service staff and they were kind of in that high-risk group, and some people didn't want to, deal with food distribution during the pandemic and during the school closure. So this basically is ensuring that you're going to continue to do that and that you're going to prohibit indoor assemblies that bring students together from more than one classroom. So the idea of having a pop assembly, the idea of having a speaker and gathering people into the auditorium in phase 4, it's very specific that you're not going to do that. And then this last one on this page, that you assure that you're going to cooperate with your local public health department. I was on a webinar today that MASSA had, and the whole idea of starting the conversation now with your public health official and making sure you're on the same page is really a good one. I know a lot of districts are literally having weekly meetings with their county health official just making sure that everybody is on the same page. So I think that's definitely a good practice. And as principals, I think it'd be very helpful if you were in the loop on those meetings as well. Next page. When we get into the preparedness plan document itself, it's created so that it can be fillable. It's meant to, be able to negotiate it that way. When you download it, you download a copy and then you can type right into it. So this is the part where it really starts saying, describe the policies and procedures you are going to follow when the region is in, which the district is located in, is in phase 1, 2, or 3 of the Michigan Safe Start Plan. One of the things that superintendents have been asking the governor's office is sometimes the region, the SEMCOG region that you're in, doesn't align so that the whole ISD, like all the schools that would naturally be working together, aren't in the same region in terms of that. So there's been a request that be considered, that the region actually become the ISD jurisdiction. That hasn't happened yet, but just know that that's something that someone has requested. So if you get into the phase 4 part again, describing your policies and procedures that you're going to follow when you're in phase 4, and you really have to go through all of the kind of daily things that you're going to encounter, whether it's face coverings, etc. And note that in blue, I kind of highlighted it. If you are going to disclude something that is highly recommended, why? You have to explain yourself. So the concept is you're going to be posting these on your website, and everyone in the community and otherwise is going to have access to your plan. So if you're not following it, that could become problematic for you as well. Bob or Colin, anything you'd add to that?
Well, that piece, Wendy, goes to one of the questions we had about a staff member to volunteer to watch the students in the quarantine room. That's a strongly recommended element. So if you don't have someone, or that's not something you're going to do, as Wendy pointed out, that's something you would include in your plan, as we're not doing this and the here's why piece of it. It's not a required component, so it's not something you absolutely have to do.
With that said, one of the things, particularly with the federal stimulus dollars that's under debate right now, is providing additional money to be able to open up schools and to be able to do these. And one of the considerations that's out there is, how do we take people who are currently laid off from employment and get them off from unemployment? And so part of the thinking, particularly within the Senate at the federal level, is to be able to get some of those people in school. So are there healthcare professionals or other people in the community that schools could hire to work within those rooms if they have current staff who are unwilling to do that? So it may be that you have to look beyond your current staff to be able to do that. It reminds me of back when, I had some kids with epilepsy, and at one point we had to use the injectors for the anal injectors, and nobody wanted to do it in our staff. And we had to come up with a plan on doing it because it was a safety thing we had to. So I think there are going to be considerations like that, even though that wasn't life-threatening, as you mentioned here, that COVID could be that, but looking to who could we secure in order to work in those types of spaces, whether they're healthcare professionals or others, and what type of training would they need in order to do so. And that really comes in then as we start going through this plan, looking at hygiene, cleaning, athletic screening, all of these areas that we are responsible for looking at, including testing of students and transportation. As far as Dave, the mixed messages as far as screening goes, I don't know that schools have to be the ones doing the screening when they come in, but it is one of the strongly recommended. What is part of that is that students and families needing to indicate whether or not their child has one. So one of the things we'll look at later is some examples of how you might use your learning management system as a daily check-in for those health things. Just like today, I went and got my teeth cleaned. They did a little survey they sent me through a text message I had to fill out. And then when I got there, they actually did do the temperature screening, but that was an elective choice that they made to make as we go forward. So within these plans,
can I talk about the screening piece again? Dave, when you, your question about screening and maybe a mixed message, I was on a webinar earlier today where a county health official was saying, that it's not required that you take temperatures as students are entering the building or as parents are entering the building, but they thought that that would, that you can do it. And then Troon law apparently has told people that you can't do temperature checks according to the school code. So the governor's office is aware that there is some conflict out there in things of that nature. Another related example like that where there might be a conflict is that the county health officials are saying that, especially at that K2 range, if students wanted to wear a face mask rather than a face shield rather than a mask, that would be allowable, and Troon law is saying that that isn't allowable. So the governor's office is aware of some of those conflicts that are out there, and they're creating an FAQ that will help to clarify some of those types of questions.
So as we go through, there's especially these phases then that you have to go through, and then it just repeats from what Wendy talked about for phase 4. You just repeat the exact same thing for phase 5. Many districts that we talk with, and including ISDs, have indicated and have recommended that whatever you're doing in phase 4, continue to do in phase 5, which really makes a lot of sense because the original requirements of phase 5 or the thoughts for phase 5 actually in the roadmap got pushed down to phase 4 because originally phase 4 was much more restrictive than it is right now, more like what you would anticipate for phase 3. So it may be something you do there. From there then, there is a submission process. Do you want to hit on that, Wendy? Or you want...
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
so that's okay. I know you got on a roll. That's great. So we look at the final steps for submission here. And once again, it's that idea that it's going to be board approved and literally, that you have that date stated as to when the board approved it, the minutes from the meeting, who the board president is, and then that you're going to post it on your website. And then the idea is that the preparedness plan is going to be collected by the ISD, and we'll have that information on file as well. So all of those pieces are the requirements, and you just want to make sure that you do that. Do you have to use this actual form? No, but I think you can see just from what we went through why it would probably be beneficial to actually use this form to make sure that you are checking all the boxes.
So one of the things that we've done to support you, and Ryan put the link to this in the website, is we've created a landing page for reopening schools. Within that landing page, there's the governor's roadmap for reopening schools. There's the comparison chart that I referenced that's a fillable PDF. So as a fillable PDF, what you're able to do is go into this document and you can check the boxes on the ones that you're doing, leave blank the other ones as you're going through your plan from a planning purposes. In addition to that, there's the Google spreadsheet, so you can click on that, make a duplication, and have that available so that it's a working document between multiple people. We've also created a sample document that you can use for reopening of schools. And so it does require you to make a copy of it, but once you do make a copy and you open it up, we've gone through and put together, based on the model that's provided for you, all of the language that you might need. There is one area, because it's locally developed with their health departments, that we left available. But we went through for phases 1 through 3 and gave you a plan. Please note, we did take those strongly recommended protocols as well as the required and included them here. So in the areas where it says which of the strongly recommended did you not do, we did note that those strongly we included all the strongly recommended. So we plan to implement all strongly recommended. But if you're not planning to do that, that's where that spreadsheet could come into play, where you could show which ones you are and not doing without having to retype them all if you wanted to. So just note on that website that we have, this reopening preparedness plan, you have a sample for each of the phases there. We also have Kent ISD worked with Spectrum Health and Troon Law to create a school plan. And so within their plan, they've not only put together one that doesn't necessarily follow the exact format of the template, but does include all the information that's needed there. One of the things I thought was really positive about this is at the very end, any sign and or poster that you might need as a resource for printout is all put together for you in one document. So the resource sections of the Kent ISD plan has everything that's needed for posting within your building in one place. And they have elementary and secondary examples there. They've also put together one that's available for childcare facilities. So know that on this website, we've put together our own plan that is based on the roadmap and the strongly and required pieces that is within the template. And then we have 2 other plans, knowing that some ISDs are using their own format. And this is an example from Kent ISD, both for schools and for child care facilities, for those of you who have that responsibility as well. In addition to that, we've added in some of the other tools that we've had from previous times and shared with you, including our checklists, our surveys, and then links to additional resources, knowing that there are other organizations that have done tremendous work and provided some resources so that we have one place that principals can bookmark and continue to go to. And know that we will continue to update that as we go. With that, what we'd like to do is poll you again about how the information shared by Bob, Wendy, and I connects with your prior knowledge or your district planning. So, is this new information to you and may help you develop your plan? Does this connect with your understanding and help you? Does this conflict with your understanding and you might need additional clarification? Or as given your completion or where you are, this may be used to audit your plan. Where are you at? Which of these best represents your thinking?
We are about 85% there. We'll give you about another 10 or 15 more seconds.
So for most people, what we're sharing is connected to what you're thinking and might help you in developing that plan. So thank you for sharing that. So as you start to think forward, there are some, particularly those in decision-making policy world, that are very far removed from schools that think this is a simple thing. Just put masks on everybody and everything's going to be all right. And as you know, this isn't a simple thing. Just looking at the questions that have come up in the Q&A, as well as all the questions we've been fielded, we know this is highly complex and sophisticated, and it becomes even more complex when you look at individual local areas. So please don't take what we're going to share with you now as the one way or right way to do it, but some ideas that are transferable and applicable to your setting. All we're here to do is share some thoughts about what you could or should do based on what we've explored with others in relationship to what's required or strongly recommended. So as we go forward, know that we do empathize with the fact that this is going to be a greater challenge, but many things in life are. And as school principals, when things hit us, we do find a way to make it happen. So the first 2 things we want you to be thinking about is how might you ensure continuity of learning regardless of the phases, regardless of the approach. One of the lessons that people learned during the spring was trying to create both hard copy packets, online packets, virtual things, tripled the work. And then when you add in the factors for whole child around providing food and social emotional learning and connections, that just amplified the amount of work that need to be done with limited capacity. So what we want you to be thinking about is how might you structure your approach to learning so that it works, whether you're in phase 1, 2, or 3, phase 4, or phase 5. How might you put things in a virtual format so that whether kids are there or not, they're ready to go? Whether we have a snow day, a polar vortex, or another pandemic, we can shift agilely between those two. What are those adaptive pieces that we can apply from there? Secondly, how might we mitigate risk for our student staff while also minimizing disruption to our families in that? And so with that, in the past, we've shared a couple different ideas. Do we look at some type of cohorting based on response to intervention? Do we, for example, in one school district that we're working with, they're going to bring in their elementary students face-to-face. They're going to use their elementary school and their high school building to be able to house all of their elementary students daily. Their middle school is going to continue to be operating as a middle school, but it's going to be a hybrid where students come a couple days a week and they're working remotely a couple days a week. And they're putting all their high schoolers online virtually the entire time in order to save that space. In their plan, the students are able to shift between, regardless of where that is. It addresses some of their childcare needs in their communities, as well as space things to keep it there. In another district that we're working with that had a high percentage of students with IEPs, 504, and ELL, they're looking at bringing back students with those plans on a daily basis, while bringing back students who maybe struggle with learning but don't have official plans for 3 days a week, where 2 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, for example, all students are there. Wednesday, those tier 2, 3 or kids are there. And then a second cohort of students are there on Thursday, Friday. So that's another way to look at that cohorting. We also shared with you some ideas around the 3x4 block for those who are on a 6-period day, or a 3x5 block for those of you on trimesters, or possibly a 4x4 block for those who are on a 7 or 8-period day. The benefit of these plans is you're minimizing the number of students who are in the building at any one time. You're minimizing the need for transportation as far as number of students on buses. And you're also able to accommodate either less teachers in order to teach this, if your teachers are teaching all 3 hours or 3 blocks of those each day, and or it's allowing, like a district I spoke with this morning, that they're actually going to have teachers teach all 3 hours within that 3x4 block, but they're going to be able to reduce class sizes to bring in kids more. So anticipating they're not going to have to lay off staff, they're going to use that staff in order to fill out more sections of classes to reduce class sizes in order to be able to accommodate some of that social distancing. One of the questions that came up from 2 people had to do with the cohorting as far as limiting in that. I can tell you that there are some schools who are looking at bringing back 100% of their kids every day, but they're looking at it from the point of view of actually students working in a virtual classroom, but sequestered within the building. So in their community, the school believes that their community wants kids in schools every day, but they don't have the space to have them in a classroom. So they're putting them online, almost like you would do for administering some of the state assessments, where you're assigning kids to cohorts of maybe 12, 15, but you're using all of those students as more, or the staff as supervisors, and you're using every space of your building to do it. And in doing so, those students are in that space almost sequestered, and then they're being able to provide the online pieces. So that's another way they're looking to do that. But by using some of these modified schedules, as another alternative, students are only having 2 or 3 passing periods versus the traditional 6 or 8 passing periods during the day, which mitigates. It also provides a longer length of time for custodial staff and other staff to clean those common areas. We know that some schools are partnering with either athletic organizations or with hotels and stuff to get those aerator types of things that can fumigate, if you will. I don't know if you've seen those on TV, kind of like the sideline blowers for coolers that they're now outfitting with disinfectant. And there's also ones that almost look like little vacuum cleaners that throw out sanitizer within the air that we're using in common spaces between those passing periods to help mitigate that as another opportunity.
Hey, Colin, before you go on, we also had a question from Brandy about, has anyone been given guidance about protocols for when a staff member or a student is confirmed with COVID? And the reason why I bring that up at this point is because this idea of trying to mitigate contact by doing a cohorting model it really does help to reduce the number of people that the students are coming in contact with. And the school's also going to have a responsibility for that contact tracing piece. So if you were to have a student who ended up testing positive, if they only exchanged classes 3 times, obviously you would have a much less number of people that they possibly came in contact with. Another thing to remember is that in the requirements, students aren't going to be able to go to lockers or to share lockers, because you would obviously end up having another problem there. So, I mean, there are many pieces of the puzzle to work through and to think about. But the goal would be that if students came in contact with a more limited number of people, if you had a positive case, it would just take that cohort offline, not the entire building. So how that's going to pan out, what your legal counsel's advice is going to be, what your county health officials' advice is going to be is really critical. So as you kind of have these questions, these are the types of things that you want to walk through and think about.
We actually, in partnership with Maven Solution, a learning management system, actually created a contact tracing right within that learning management system. So when kids are coming into classrooms, they take a picture of a QR code on the classroom door. And that is one of the ways they're taking attendance, but it's also checking kids in. And when they leave, they take a picture of the QR code on their way out. So every room within the facility has a QR code at the entrance and exit. So students are now just essentially QR coding in and out of class, in and out of restrooms, in and out of common areas as a way for contact tracing, so that if there is an outbreak that way, we're able to account for who came into contact within that 15-minute period that they're saying from a safety point of view.
Can I just add, can we get to one more question before you go on?
Yes,
so,
I'm sorry.
That's all right. Jessica was asking about looking for some guidance about movement in the building and conceptualizing assemblies and things of that nature. Keep in mind that even in phase 4, you're going to have to adhere to social distancing requirements, face masks, and groups of less than 100. So you don't want to go on and think about an assembly that isn't going to be able to meet those requirements. And this is even something that, like right now, if you're having a camp or you're having, band camp, for example, they have to follow these requirements. So I know when I was principal in Rochester and we had a 215 student marching band, can't get all 215 of them together at the same time. It's 100 or fewer.
So as we go forward, there's likely going to be more questions than there are answers, but know that in partnership with you, we hope to provide or seek resolutions to the questions you have. So continue to put them into the Q&A as we go. The third question I'd like you to think about is, what tools and strategies might you use to account for pupil attendance and engagement? And so one of the ways, I mentioned the Maven solution earlier, and one of the ways we've done it there is we built in a daily check-in that students do, and it's our attendance tracker as well. And so within that tool, there's a video about how to take temperatures and stuff. And then there's options for schools. One option is to use this survey from Spectrum Health that students would fill out to verify whether they are or are not running a fever, whether they've had a cough. So those things that Spectrum Health has required to enter their hospital, and they suggested schools ask of their parents. A second option that we've embedded is a more simplified one, which is essentially based on the roadmap that says, did you take a temperature, and are you greater than this? And if so, stay home. And so by this taking and actually having to submit the answer within the learning management system, you're tracking that. It doesn't keep people from making things up or being dishonest in that, but it does put the onus of responsibility on them, which does protect some liability from your end as you're going. So that's a second thing to be thinking about, is how do you do that? And then when you are in a the remote types of things, making sure that in order for pupil accounting, that you're providing things, if it's through a virtual solution, and we'll talk about this more next week in our pupil accounting piece, but if you are providing a virtual solution and students are signing in, whether it's Google Classroom or Schoology or Canvas or Maven or some other tool, What that does then is allows you to count that as the two-way communications, which doesn't require a seat time waiver. So as a district, if you have that available and students are doing that, whether they're face-to-face or in a remote setting, they're able to continue to count as that pupil accounting piece goes without having to do the hour-to-hour attendance piece. The next question I want you to think about is how might you accommodate student staff who cannot or will not return to face-to-face learning? We know that there are some, just like the one about volunteering to do the quarantine room, there are staff right now who are saying they're not going to return to school face-to-face. A survey of Michigan teachers done by an association showed 1 in 4 teachers indicated they weren't going to come back to school as instructors until there was a vaccine or increased testing and tracing going on. 1 in 5 parents have said the same thing. So those are from earlier this summer, so that number may have changed. But the point being, we have ways in which to accommodate that. A couple of thoughts that districts can consider within their plan come from Three Rivers Community Schools and Hamilton Community Schools. And in their approach, what they've done is they've asked their teachers, what would you prefer as an instructor? Would you prefer to do face-to-face if you had an option of doing a blended, or whether you would want to do remote? And so by doing that, they first secured from teachers what they wanted to do, so that if they were able to move forward by putting people in a choice, they're more likely to engage in it and own that choice. They've also then put that out there to their families by providing a choice. Do you want face-to-face? Do you want a blended? Do you want a virtual? And in Hamilton's case, what I thought was really helpful is it tells you whether or not that option might be best for you based on your both your behavior, your engagement, your self-discipline, those types of things, but also the way you learn. And so as you're thinking about how to accommodate students and staff, sometimes the best way to do it is to provide them an option rather than an edict. So as you think about those pieces, there are a couple things that we believe you need to do now. The first thing that we believe you need to do is revisit your 2021 master schedule and facility plan. If you're like I was as a building principal, you likely had juniors, maybe even some of your sophomores and freshmen making course selections way back in January before we even had a hard hit in the US around the COVID-19. You had 8th graders maybe in February just before you were setting people free to do it. And as you built your master schedule, you likely built your master schedule with the hopes of people returning face-to-face and thinking that this might be past us. Now that we know that we are in it, and it's likely that we're going to take a step back before we go forward, and that as we go forward, we'll likely have multiple steps back, we need to be intentional about who, when, and where, and how do we deliver instruction. So how might we need to revise that master schedule and facility plan to accommodate all students and staff, whether remote, blended, or face-to-face? How might we use some of our staff that we would have used maybe in Parapro, or some of our instructional staff that maybe are in courses that can't be done remotely? How do we partner with them, with some of maybe our teachers who are higher at risk? Or how do we make them available so that if teachers are absent, we have built-in substitutes, knowing that just having substitute teachers in the building increases the cross-contamination across that, and the likelihood that how many people for $75 to $90 a day are going to want to come into schools and risk those pieces. So how do we use our existing staff to provide some of that coverage during that time? So if I'm thinking about that from the lens of my master schedule, I'd encourage you to identify through surveying, if you haven't already, students' family preference for their return to school. Which ones prefer face-to-face, blended, or remote based on the current circumstances? Repeat that with your educators. Which ones are they willing to do? And then you're able to figure out which ones are highly qualified and certified to teach those specific courses. Once you know kind of the ratio of where it is, you may be able to accommodate more people face-to-face because there are more people who are going virtual. Or you may be able to offer less blended because you have more people virtual or in other types of situations. But once you have that then, and you know which educators can teach and moderate different or supervise different environments, then determine the approaches and courses that you're going to offer. What's band going to be like? For example, Wendy brought up, I know the band that my son is with has over 200 students in the band. Their band is big for marching band, and then they have an indoor percussion. So one of the things looking at is, do we run band as one of our cohorted classes if we move to a block during the first term and the fourth term because of the drum and bugle corps component? Do we have choir that do most of their concerts and their performances and musical during the winter? Do we run those during the second and third term? So as we're thinking about PE classes, knowing that outdoors is safer than indoors, do we run our PE classes during, for example, the fall and the spring and not the winter as far as our courses based on available space? So as we go forward, we can think through those things. And then that leads to how many cohorts might we need in order to accommodate students in the building. So my friend Tom Leitz, who's at Utica, was sharing with me that given the size of their classrooms, because of the older building, they could fit 8 to 12 kids within a classroom with social distancing. When I was in Mattawan with a 30 by 30 classroom and mapping it out, I could fit 12 to 15 students depending on how much space I needed at the front of the room for the teachers. So if I'm a principal and I'm looking to create that master schedule, and I know how many students I have and what's the capacity, I can set up how many cohorts. So for example, if I can fit 12 kids in a class and my class sizes can average 24, I only need 2 cohorts. But if I'm going to have 25 to 36 kids in a class, I'm going to need 3 cohorts. Whereas if I can fit 15 students within a classroom, then I only need 2 cohorts if I'm averaging 30 kids a class. But if I'm going to have over 30 kids a class, I might need 3 cohorts. So in order to determine that, I need to know what my facilities and staffing is in conjunction with that. Once I do that, I can identify and assign students to cohorts based on those available resources. For districts that have a lot of transportation, you might be looking at households, neighborhoods, or bus routes. I was talking to a principal in the Muskegon area, and they have less transportation, so they're looking to put kids into cohorts A through L and M through Z. And so that's how they're identifying, and then that keeps families together too, knowing that, looking at cohorts for families, that if I have middle school kids, do they report on the same day as my high school kids from a child care and supervision point of view. So thinking about how we distribute students so we keep families and households together, as well as accommodating the spaces. Once we have that, we can build and run that master schedule. As a building principal myself, I think what I would do is build that master schedule, set my hard caps at half the class size, and then just duplicate it so I don't have to run and split kids after the fact. But within your systems, then you're able to balance those classes and address any of those schedule conflicts. So that's something I would do now before teachers are returning, and something that I would get done in the next 2 weeks in order to be able to communicate what it is that needs to be done so that teachers and staff know their assignments. So once we
Colin, can I pause
Yep.
you just real quick, answer a couple of questions that are out there that I saw.
Yes.
One, do you need to social distance if you're still in a cohort? Answer is yes at grades 6 through 12. The only way you can avoid, social distancing, not required. Strongly recommended across the board, but not required. So social distancing is a local decision. Do you need to social distance? The answer is no social distancing. Mask wearing in cohort, everybody 6-12 has to wear a mask, period. There's no exception. The only exception is K5 for mask wearing if you cohort the kids within a classroom. The other question was, does the 100 or fewer person limit apply for lunchtime? That 100 or fewer person gathering limit is for social gatherings and for competitions like athletic competitions, spectator events. It doesn't apply to lunchtime. So the 100-person limit is not going to apply to many of the things you would do within a school. It's specific in what it applies to. Thanks, Colin.
So once you have that master schedule and facilities plan developed, then we have to turn our focus in August really to getting our teachers, our staff, and our parents prepared for the approaches and strategies we're using. So what is it that our staff needs? What is it our students need? What is it our parents need in order to enact the plan and support student learning? So in some of our other trainings, some of you may have seen this before, but there's 3 C's that we encourage you to focus on when planning learning. Whether you're planning a classroom lesson, whether you're planning adult learning, or you're planning a return to school. First, connections. We've heard many times prioritizing Maslow over balloons, compassion over compliance. Both teachers, students, and community need to know how and where do I belong within the school. Whether I'm remote, whether I'm in a blended or a face-to-face, how do we address the connection? So in our training, in the professional learning, focusing on how do we develop a sense of belonging? What are the belonging cues, both verbal and nonverbal, particularly nonverbal when wearing a mask? What does that look like so that we create that connection that's necessary within our school community? The second piece that we need to look at when providing professional learning is our competency. What is my skill and or ability to deliver learning, to organize learning, to curate resources within a learning management system? How do I assess students remotely? What are the skills and or abilities my students are going to need to be able to access, engage, post, publish, submit work within my classroom? What is it that parents need to know about how to access supports, resources, receive questions, address things, everything from technology to others? So those competencies are not only knowledge, they're skills in their dispositions. And the third C to be thinking about when planning it is control. How do you provide choice to your teachers, your students, and families in how they learn and obtain that information? So as we look to do that, the initial piece around the different options for returning to school is one way to portray control. The other way to think about control is how do you engage people in the learning? Do you allow those who need the conversations to engage in PLC work? Do you have some who need to read it and think about it before they engage in it? Do we provide them things on demand? Are there those who are more, they need to go explore something and inquire? So how do you build choice in for the control piece when building those PD for your staff? So as you start to look to that, and there's a list of things to consider in PD, in the MASSP, to return to school principles checklist, with the types of technical and skill-based schools. And then Michigan Virtual has a bunch, of course, as well that they put on Keep Michigan Learning. From there, then, it's important throughout this process to communicate, to listen, to communicate more, and to continue to listen. Knowing that if we're not clear about our vision, we're going to create confusion. If we're not clear about the skills and developing those skills in our stakeholders, there's going to be anxiety and fear. If we don't build an incentive to do this work, there's going to be resistance. If we don't provide the resources and materials that they need, there's going to be frustration. And if we just go forward with good hopes and not a good plan, we're going to have false starts, and we're going to find ourselves middle of September and October rebooting one more time. And politically, I don't think we can sustain another one more time. So as we're continuing to do that, remember where you are right now is a good place to be. Then think about what's your ideal state, knowing that this is an opportunity to leverage the pandemic to reinvent education so that not only the students who have been served in the past continue to be served, but those who have historically been underserved have a better opportunity and a better chance for improvement. So as you go forward and we think about this new now, think about what are those baby steps you can take in the next 2 weeks to put yourself in a position for master schedule and professional development in order to take another step towards that ideal state, collecting evidence along the way and framing it around your vision of high quality instruction as defined within your instructional framework and your rubric. To support you in that effort, know that MASSP stands with you in this struggle, in this challenge. We'll continue to put together the resources as are listed on this page and others as we go forward. In addition, we have a series coming up. The next 2 weeks, we have 4 webinars. Next week, Wednesday, Bob and the pupil accounting will be coming on and talking more about pupil accounting regulations, requirements. What are those flexible learning options, common pitfalls, options, and considerations that we should have? The very next day, we're going to have a panel of 4 to 5 schools that are going to be sharing their plans, their approaches, and models for reopening, both in a remote, blended, and face-to-face way. The following week, we have the people who put together the Keep Michigan Learning and the Michigan Virtual Resources, the chairs of each of those 3 committees, as well as Dave Richards, who led that work, and Jamie Fitzpatrick, will be part of a webinar to share with you some of the resources, particularly as it relates to your professional learning and learning management. And then on that following Thursday, we'll have GELN sharing some of their plans and suggestions and links for reopening school safety. On August 6th, this will be the only one that's a paid fee for registration, is we have a national speaker coming to join us for a 9 to 11:30 webinar about what can we do to close the pandemic-related achievement gap. So put these on your calendar. We look forward to you joining us then and certainly appreciate the leadership that you've provided in a time of crisis, providing stability and vision to your community. We are proud to serve with you and stand beside you as you serve your local communities, advancing learning for each and every student, teacher, staff, and family.